Hello and welcome to the TBT video guide on how to strip a screw-in trigger block Weihrauch rifle. That's all models HW80, HW35, HW77 and HW97 that have the screw-in trigger block. The gun I've got in front of me is an HW80, that's what we'll be working on today. Now, I've got a confession to make. This one came in, bit clunky, bit nasty. I was going to do a live strip down and show you and troubleshoot and all that. It was full of axle grease. Absolutely, it went everywhere. It just would have been half an hour of me swearing. So I cleaned it all up, put it back together, and now I'm going to show you with a clean gun how it all works. Now, first thing we need to do is remove the action from the stock. I've already undone all the screws. Away comes the stock. Put it to one side. Now, the best thing to do next is with the HW80 or the HW35 is to remove the barrel. I've already undone and slightly pushed through the barrel pivot pin just to help speed up the video. So we push that all the way through, put the pivot pin safely to one side. Now, when we remove the barrel, there are shims that stop the barrel from wobbling. We need to find both of these, put them somewhere safe because they are easy to damage, easy to lose and difficult to replace. The cocking arm now comes out of the cocking shoe and we can put the barrel to one side. And with a small screwdriver, just lift the cocking shoe out of its little run there and put that to one side. The next part to remove is the trigger unit itself at the back here. So just using some punch pins. That was a lot easier than the first time. Put these safely to one side. Now you'll notice I'm keeping hold of the safety catch there. That's because it's spring loaded. And quite often it'll fly across the room and you'll be on your hands and knees looking for it for ages. And those little springs there, again, very difficult to replace. So put that to one side. Now, here is the action. This is where everything happens. We've got the piston, we've got the spring guide, trigger goes through to there. This is the part we need to undo next. As mentioned, this is a screw-in trigger block, which, as it implies, that back part is screwed into place. Now, as you would expect, it's very, very tight. So what we need to do is just brace one end, then with a bit of leverage, just start it turning like that, and then it can be turned by hand. It's always best practice with these to put it in a sash clamp so that when it's opened up you don't have the full tension of the spring throwing things everywhere, potentially hurting you. This one I'm going to do by hand because I've already had it apart and I know there's very little preload on this. So wind that out, just keeping pressure downwards on the table. There we are, that's gone. Now, that is a Weihrauch spring guide. Isn't it lovely? Look at the lovely way they've clamped out those nasty edges at the back. That is not a good thing to have. It doesn't help the spring to move. It just creates recoil. There. As I've mentioned before, I've already degreased all this because it was just crammed full of bright orange axle grease. The spring itself is straight, in good condition. The edges, you can see there, absolutely fine. Just give them a little rub around with a small file. If you can feel anything with your finger, just get rid of it with a small file, but the spring itself is fine. Now, the piston, I would always recommend that you put it into, well, I use a lathe, but you can put that part into a drill chuck, spin it up with some wet and dry. Start off with medium, then fine, then ultra fine, and finish off with auto saw. That gives you a much smoother surface and much better performance. In the proper spirit of Blue Peter, here's one I prepared earlier. So, we are going to be fitting, due to that nasty spring guide there, the TBT drop-in kit. Inside of here we have instructions. Please read them, even though you're watching the video. Go through the instructions step by step. We have a spring guide, a top hat, 2 preload washers which go at the rear over the spring guide to add tension to the spring if required, if you need to bring the power up. Very unlikely in an HW80. A slip washer to go under the top hat to act as a bearing. A small amount of emery paper just in case anything needs a little bit of a smooth. And a small amount of molybdenum gun grease. So, first thing we need to do is place all of the plastic into the piston to make sure it all fits. So those 2 pieces go over the latch rod and that pushes right the way down. You can see that sitting flush on the back of the piston. If it was sitting proud like that, the gun wouldn't cock and you'd be wondering why. So always check this before you do anything. It's the first bit in bold in the instructions, but the bit that most people don't read. So that's very important. Right, that was fine. Put the top hats out. Next thing we need to do is check that the spring guides fit into the spring. So, here's the spring guide into the spring. That's a nice fit in there. Then the top hat into that end. And that's a firm but nice fit into there. So, you want just a small amount of grease on the lip of there, just some inside of there, just to provide a bit of lubrication for that. And then, now, this grease that comes with it is standard gun grease. You may have bought the optional TBT Tinbum slide or bum slide high molybdenum content grease. Rather than the standard one, this has got added molybdenum to it, so it's a very high content, and it's more like a paste than a grease. It's not very liquid. It's much more gritty with the crystals. At the back of the piston here, you'll be able to feel and see when you have it. There's actually a raised section. This is the part that rides down the inside of the compression tube. So that's the only part of the piston we actually need to put grease on. And if you're using this stuff, that is enough. Okay, just a small amount around the base like that. Then what's left on your finger can just be rubbed around the seal like that, and that, believe it or not, is enough. Just a very small amount of it needs to go in this little recess here, which is where the cocking shoe slide goes, just to ease its passage up and down in there. Now if you want the grease that comes in there, if you're using the high quality grease on the actual piston, you can cover your spring in that. I don't bother. I try to run the gun as dry as possible, simply because that way there's less dieseling likely to occur. With decent fitting guides it's not necessary anyway, because that will kill the twang rather than cramming it full of grease. So that all goes back inside of there. Things to be aware of on rebuilding: always put the barrel back on and locate the cocking arm before you fitted the trigger block to the back. That means the piston isn't under tension, which means it's a lot easier to manipulate into place. When refitting your trigger into the trigger block, you'll of course be putting your safety catch back in as well. Before placing it in there, use a screwdriver or a punch or something to cock the action. That means you're not forcing it up against the back of there. It'll go in much easier, be much easier to manipulate. But when you do fit it to the rifle, don't forget you need to fire the action before it will cock again. So if you put it together and the gun won't cock, it's probably because you forgot to pull the trigger. Thank you for watching the TBT video on how to strip down an HW80. Please watch my other videos. Thank you.